Hello, my absolute darlings, and welcome once again to another episode of The Library is Open. So I do hope you brought your library card. Just grab my tea because, you know, when I don't have it, I get complaints. It's true. There's quality control measures that need to be observed. I hope you're all doing well as we enter, I believe for me this is week 13 of lockdown. I'm aware that you know, sort of measures have changed somewhat, and you know, we're constantly evolving this concept of what the new normal is. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm still in lockdown. I'm leaving the house for essential journeys or socially distanced events that are necessary either to business or to well, just business really, career-wise, and so on and so forth. Everyone will have to make that choice themselves, but yeah, as far as I'm concerned, it's still lockdown. Another couple of bits of housekeeping. You will notice that for the last couple of videos, I've had links in my pinned comment. I tried to do it in the description, but it wouldn't let me, which feels a bit dodgy. But let's hope it was just a malfunction. Where in the pinned comment you'll find a list of resources linked to the Black Lives Matter movement, which I am obviously supporting, because why wouldn't you? There are links there where you can donate to relevant charities and organisations. There are petitions you can sign. If you can donate, that's great. If you can't, at least give your signature. It takes a couple of minutes and you can really make a difference. There's also resources, because I think education on the subject of systemic racism and oppression in society is lifelong work, and we all just need to keep working and owning that learning, you know, and really making an effort with it. And there's also you know, some of the stuff that you can do, be involved with, and you know, grow your sense of allyship with the movement. So there's that. The other piece of housekeeping would be that it is Pride Month. So happy Pride Month. Well, and the concept of Pride Month is interesting as well, because I think Pride Month is sort of American, I believe it would be, in the sense that it's I only mean in the sense that in the UK and stuff, I'm not 100% sure about other countries. Pride season kind of goes anytime from like May to September, and as you know, when I perform with the Vegan Queens, it's like pretty much half a year that we are performing at Pride events, and as I'm speaking to you today, the day before our digital online Pride event, LimePride, which will be streamed live from the Vegan Queens channel, which is always linked in the description, along with those vegan guys. So if you can pop over and subscribe to the Vegan Queens if you haven't. We're trying to get to 1k by tomorrow so that we can accept donations through the YouTube platform, and we want to support some LGBTQIA charities. So yeah, that's the housekeeping for today, and without further ado, let's dust off the library cards and talk about today's book. And she's a big one. Look at that proper chunkster to get your hands on. I nicked chunkster a little bit from Simon at SavidgeReads, which is also linked in a comment down below, or possibly the description, depending on how tech savvy I'm feeling. Go and check out his channel because he's great. And today we are going to talk about Janice Hadlow's novel, The Other Bennet Sister, which is that beautiful cover, isn't it? The cover is doesn't tell you what it's called really. It's just from Bridgman Images, but I'd like to hope it was you know, an old sort of painting or something, but don't have that information at my fingertips. So The Other Bennet Sister is a sort of follow-on, if you will, or a kind of sequel to Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, which, if you're not aware, is my absolute favourite book of all time. Somewhat cliche, but true. I think I've talked about this before. At one point, I'll make a dedication video to it. Which, if you're not aware, quick précis, tells the story of the fortunes and lives of the 5 Bennet sisters in their quest for, I was going to say quest for marriage, but it's not really necessarily that. It's more about their lives and loves and their mother's quest for them all to be married. So the daughters are Jane, who's the eldest, Elizabeth, who's the sort of protagonist heroine, if you will, of Pride and Prejudice. There's Mary, the middle sister, Kitty and Lydia are the youngest, and you know, famously, Pride and Prejudice deals primarily with Lizzie's relationship as it goes through its various metamorphoses with Mr. Darcy, who is initially aloof and very much sort of snobby about her family, and eventually comes to reconsider, let's say. In fact, a bit of trivia, the initial title of Pride and Prejudice was First Impressions, which kind of really sums it up as well. Quickie, just because people always ask. Today I'm wearing my Spice Girls Spice World t-shirt, which feels very pertinent at the moment. I got this at the tour. Was it last year? Last year, yeah, just after my birthday, which has also just been, so thank you. I want to shout out Bobby for that as well, the fabulous Bobby, who sent me a beautiful birthday card and gift through the mail, so thank you, darling. Love you lots. So, yes, to get on to the other Bennet sister, we pick up basically in the middle of Pride and Prejudice, and we see things from another perspective. So our lead character in this book is Mary, who's the middle sister, and she's dealt with sort of, almost as a sort of comic, like mini subplot in Pride and Prejudice, which is a really interesting lesson, I think, in, you know, depending on who the particular hero, heroine, protagonist of a book is, it reflects how we see the people around them. You know, there's a famous old saying, isn't there, that everyone is the hero of their own story. And, you know, Pride and Prejudice has Lizzie, and this has Mary, who's the middle sister. She probably gets the least coverage in Pride and Prejudice because she's portrayed as quite studious and quite prudish in some ways. You know, she's the one sort of coming out with philosophical quotes or Bible quotations, so on and so forth, when, you know, Lizzie in particular is ruled by her emotions and her intelligence, whereas Mary is there to sort of parrot things. But in this book, she sort of takes centre stage, and we discover after the first part, which is a sort of recap of Pride and Prejudice from her point of view, what happens to her after. Yeah, we're given to understand that all her other sisters have since been married and, you know, moved on with their lives, and their mother, Mrs. Bennet, is very happy about that. She's like a pig in mud. A pig in mud. Notice I almost swore then, I stopped myself, because it's a family show. And, you know, later on in the book, Mr. Bennet, the head of the family, has died, and as we discover in Pride and Prejudice, the estate has been entailed away from his wife and his daughters because he didn't produce a male heir. Such was, you know, misogyny of the Regency era. So now the Collinses, which is Lizzie's former best friend Charlotte Lucas and her husband Mr. Collins, who's a cousin of the Bennets, have taken up residence, and so Mrs. Bennet and Mary, as the sort of, I guess, leftovers, which feels horrible, of the family, are sort of farmed out to each of the daughters in turn. So they go and spend time with Jane and Mr. Bingley, they go and spend time with Lizzie at Pemberley and Mr. Darcy, and then finally Mary sort of breaks out on her own and goes to stay with, well, first she returns to the former Bennet home as well, and we get sort of more fleshing out of the plotline with Charlotte Lucas and Mr. Collins, who's a very sort of comic fool. We get a lot more depth to both those characters. There's really interesting parts where we look at how Charlotte sort of sacrificed ideas about true love to marry Mr. Collins in order for, you know, stability and so on and so forth, and what the consequences of that have been. And we look at Mary developing a relationship of sorts with Mr. Collins, because we find out that actually in Janice Hadlow's interpretation, she had been fully prepared to marry Mr. Collins during the events of Pride and Prejudice, and then that hadn't obviously panned out. And they later sort of forge another relationship, as it were, in this book. Another person, this is what this is really great for, because it sort of fleshes out ideas around these characters which almost feel like public property now, because you know, Jane Austen's world is so beloved that you know, they continue to inspire thought and continue to inspire speculation. So yeah, we also get a lot about the housekeeper of the Bennets in this book and her relationship with Mary and how she sort of G's Mary on. Hill, which is lovely. We find out about her family and her relationships and so on and so forth. And then in the final section, well, I say the final section, it's quite a long section, Mary goes to stay with her mother's brother and his wife, the Gardners in London, who were small but pivotal characters in Pride and Prejudice in Lizzie's relationship with Mr. Darcy. And from there she sort of blossoms and starts to, it's really quite beautifully done actually. There's an element of the cliche in it, but the good kind, in the sense that, you know, all cliches have an element of truth in them. So, you know, we do want to see people who are sort of the underdog or the downtrodden person really blossom into their own sense of, you know, personal success, whatever that looks like. So yeah, she becomes more alive. So the book deals a lot with Mary's pursuit of the intellectual and the philosophical, you know, and her sort of intelligence, but it also mirrors that with how in the past, in the events that we've seen her through Lizzie's perspective before, she's sort of done that as a way of combating her shyness and her sort of acceptance of her own situation, because a lot of Mary's plotline has always been that she's very plain and didn't hold much prospects for marriage, which is seen as, you know, the zenith. So she's treated quite abominably by her mother, played to perfection, by the way, in the BBC adaptation of Pride and Prejudice by Alison Steadman, who's just a treat, dream role. And then, but, you know, through this, we sort of see the way that she's taught that her intelligence is just adding another layer of reserve from marriageable men. This particular episode quite early on where she has to get glasses for the first time, and her mother's appalled because it'll make her even uglier. Not my words, hers. And we sort of see the inkling of a first flirtation for Mary, which is quickly quashed by her mother for reasons of Pride and Prejudice, funnily enough, because he's not seen as high class enough to marry Mary. It's the spectacle maker's son or apprentice. But yeah, so she sort of, what this book is great at is that eventually we sort of start to see how, look at that, I've got enough hair for a pony, a rubbish one, but you know, we sort of start to see how Mary is able to stick to her guns in terms of what she thinks of as important and what she finds personally interesting, e.g. philosophy, critical reading, new ideas, so on and so forth, and how they can be an aid to her romantic, sexual awakening, I guess, and be tools to help her develop relationships that she's always thought in the past were out of her grasp. And what Janice Hadlow, this is her first novel, by the way. She was formerly a TV producer, and she used to work for the House of Commons. She really makes us fall in love with Mary and really cheer her on from you know, behind the scenes to she goes very quickly from comic fool in the original source material to an absolutely valid, worthwhile heroine of her own story, and that's the great strength of the book. So that's really interesting. There's a couple of eggy bits, I'm not going to lie. I think there are times when the authors try to do things sort of like cheeky little Easter egg winks. So for instance, she uses a phrase where Mary's sort of contemplating intellectual pursuits for a woman and studying, and she sort of talks about how maybe all a woman needs is a room of her own, which is of course a Virginia Woolf quote, which happens significantly later than this is set, and I don't think we needed it, and it was a bit eggy. She does something similar as well with the title of another Jane Austen novel, Sense and Sensibility. There's a sentence where she says it was sense and not sensibility that had been, you know, the detriment to this relationship, which was, I'm paraphrasing here, but I don't think that was particularly necessary. I mean, it's a cute little Easter egg, but did we need it? No, I think the story's strong enough to stand on its own merits without having to pay, you know, constant nudge nudge wink wink homage to Jane Austen. That said, if you haven't read Pride and Prejudice and you're not familiar with Jane Austen, doesn't matter. If you have, it's great because there are these little Easter egg moments of particular characters or particular events. For instance, in Pride and Prejudice, there's a scene at the party, the ball I should say, where Mary's playing piano and her father stops her and shows her up sort of in front of the whole party, and that's expanded into, that's passed over in the original source material and seen only as a reflection of how her family come off to other people for Lizzie. In here it's a pivotal moment in Mary's development of perception of self and also her relationship with both her fathers and her sisters, so that's really nice. But aside from that, I think it stands alone, so you don't need to know the previous book to appreciate this. As I said, it is quite long, but it goes by quite quickly. It's, what is it, 650 pages? 650 pages? 656. There you go. But yeah, it's quite breezy. It's not a lot to plough through, and you know the plotline moves quite quickly, and sparkly, and you know, with enough in each of our characters to keep our interest throughout. So I really enjoyed this. It's one of the, probably I would say, the better sequels from the Pride and Prejudice sort of family, because there's a lot. If you have a quick look on various book websites, there'll be sort of, you know, fanfic things and series that have developed around the Bennet sisters, and also the Pride and Prejudice story retold. Another memorable one would be P.D. James did a murder mystery for Lizzie and Mr. Darcy called Death Comes to Pemberley. That was pretty good as well, I'm not going to lie, that was really good. It sort of marred those two genres together, as it were. But this, I think, is a worthy contender to stand on its own as a story of women at the time, and a very a very individualistic take on gently rebelling about what it means to be a woman, what it means to be intelligent, what it means to have independent thought, and so on and so forth, in a time when that wasn't encouraged. Oh, there's also a fantastic bit as well where Mary gets her revenge on Caroline Bingley, who's this really bitchy character from Pride and Prejudice who also appears here, and you're cheering her on all the way. Get her, Jade. So that's this week's novel, The Other Bennet Sister by Janice Hadlow. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and let me know what are your thoughts on Jane Austen. Do you like the Pride and Prejudice story? Have you seen the films? For me, it's the BBC adaptation in 6 parts. For you, maybe it's the movie with Brenda Blethyn and Keira Knightley. I don't dislike it, it's not my favourite, but you know, let me know if so, how, you know, that novel and or adaptation has any impact on your reading life. So that's it for this week. I hope you're doing well, and I hope to see you all live tomorrow on the Vegan Queens Digital Pride streaming. Well, it'll be tomorrow if you're watching this on the day I upload. If not, then oops, you missed it. But it's probably still available on the Vegan Queens YouTube channel, which, as I said before, is linked down below. Do go there. Do support Pride Month. Do absolutely continue to support the Black Lives Matter movement, because it's so important that allyship isn't performative and doesn't just last for 2 weeks. You know, while George Floyd's murder wasn't a wake-up call, because we've had numerous wake-up calls, we just keep pressing snooze, let it be the inciting incident that makes seismic change and, you know, really starts to change things for the better forever, because it needs to happen. Okay, my darlings, put away that library card nice and safe. Put it somewhere waterproof as well, because the weather's been dead dodgy lately. But take care of yourselves. Drop me some comments below and some likes. Follow me on the social medias. I'm at Twitter at StuArt, and the art is in capitalised letters. Crowther, which is in small letters, and on Instagram at Creeping Miasma, which, if you don't know, is my drag alter ego. I will see you in the next episode. Not sure when that's going to be. Things are a little bit busy at the moment on the home front, well, the work front, I should say. But I do endeavour, obviously, to at least do one a week. I hope you're keeping very well. Be safe, save lives, support, donate, amplify progressive social movements. And all of my love to you always. Mwah. Bye.